Good afternoon, I'm Peter Eijgermans from Ordina, and I worked also for the departments JTech and JS Roots. JTech is specialized in Java, and JS Roots is specialized in front-end technology. I'm talking about the difference between Vue and React, and let's start with it now. My agenda of today is building a Tesla battery range calculator dashboard, and I want to show you that in two seconds. I explained this dashboard in Vue, and I explained this dashboard in React. Building Tesla battery range calculator with Vue. Here you see the dashboard, where you see in the middle the car, and underneath you see the models and the range, how far you can drive with that battery. You can change those ranges with the speed, and it depends also on the outside temperature and the wheel size, how far you can drive. You have also a climate button in the middle for your air conditioning and the heat, which also influences the range of your battery. We make use of a Tesla battery service in the backend. This is nothing more than a lookup table, where you see that in the top I return for example, model 60, and when you select a wheel size 19, and when you select the climate is on, and the speed is 45, and the temperature is -10, you can drive 224 miles. To get started with the workshop, you can also download and clone this project from GitHub. Vue is component-based. You can integrate it very easily with Angular and React. And it is small and compact. It is 60 kilobytes big in comparison with React, that is 100 kilobytes big. And not a big difference. We can say that the performance is also the same. And what I want to say is that Angular is much bigger than Vue. It is 500 kilobytes big nowadays. To start up Vue, you have also start with the root Vue instance. With new Vue, you can start a new Vue instance. I'll show you now a very simple application, how you create such a basic Vue application. Here you start the new Vue instance in the bottom, and you define an EL section, where you define the name of the application, and it refers to the div ID app in the template. In the data section of this Vue instance, you define your model data, your state, and the state is message. State variable message as the value hello Vue, and it will be rendered in the template, and it will show Vue. You can bind this value via interpolation. This is interpolation. You use double curly brackets. Okay, Vue is component based, and the components adds logic to your HTML, to your DOM elements. You can split up your application in very little parts, so you can build your application quite easily. Here at the top you have the app container, and that is the top container of the main container, the main component of your application. And we split it up in other components. We have a component, we have a Tesla battery component, and the Tesla battery component is a component which do the heavy lifting of the application. It will do the logic, and it will manage the state of the application. The Tesla battery application also passes data to the child components like Tesla car component and Tesla STAS component. The UI of the application is represented by a components tree. It's the same structure I showed you in this image. So here at the top we have an app component, and underneath we have a Tesla header and a Tesla battery component which is a container component, they call it also, and container components always do the logic and manages the state of the application. The Tesla car component is a presentational component, and Tesla stats counter also. These are the child components of the Tesla battery, and these components, these presentational components, are only for presenting something on your screen. They are dump components. Here you see the same structure again, but that then in our application structure, you recognize the structure. In the component section, I define here the dump or the presentational components, Tesla car, Tesla climate, and I also define the Tesla battery component, which does the heavy lifting of the application. In the Tesla battery service, we manage the data of the application. At the bottom, we have also two components, app view component, this is the entry point, the first component, and the main.js, this is the starting point of our application. The component tree looks like this. The starting point is the main.js component, and what does the main.js component do? It calls the first component the app view component. The app view component has a child component, Tesla battery component, etc., etc. First, start with the main.js. What is that? The main.js component is the starting point of the application, of the Vue application, the main entry point. It imports Vue and it imports also the app view, our first component. The production tip we can skip. In the new Vue, we make use of the root Vue instance to render our first component, our first app component in the render. And then finally, this root Vue instance is mounted. This means that this is the point where the application started. This refers to an HTML element with the identification hashtag app in the app view component. I show you the app view component. It has a ID app, which I was talking about. Here the app view component has three sections: the template section for viewing for the view, the script section for the logic, and a style section for the styling. This is let's start with the script section. This is the part where we define our logic of our component. Firstly, we import the Tesla battery component, which is a child component of the app view, and we import a logo we want to show on the page. We export here the export default section. We have a few sections. The name section, that is the name of the component. The component section, we define there the child components of the app view component. In this case, that is the Tesla battery component. And in the data section, we define the data and the model and the state of our application. Here we only return here our logo, and we are going to render that in our template. How do we render that in our template? We do that with bindings. In this case, we bind the logo, we attach it to the image tag. The image tag, we attach it to the source attribute of the image tag. So we call this attribute binding. This is the way how we render the logo. Underneath the logo, we render the Tesla battery component, which I have already imported. The component tree consists now of this part, and we are talking about Tesla battery, which has a lot of child components underneath, and the Tesla battery component provides the state and the data and the properties. And the Tesla battery component, when you collapse it, you see that the Tesla battery component has a name, of course, as a component section to define the child components, as a data section to define the state of the application, computed section, we define the There we define the functions which are cached. That means that those are the functions which only are executed when a property inside a function, inside those functions, changes. In the methods section, we define normal callback methods which are not cached. This is the full example of the Tesla battery. In the components section, we see that we define there are child components. In the data section, we define the state variables, title, the Tesla models variable, and the Tesla object, which contains the user input data, what the user will select on the screen. The initial data is that speed is 55 and the initial state is temperature 20, etc. In the computed section, I make use of the functions which are cached. I have a models function which return the model data, the lookup table I showed you already, and a stats function I return here. I also define here, which calculates the range the battery can drive, how much range the battery have under the conditions that the speed changes, the temperature changes, and climate changes, and the wheel size changes. The output of this stats function is how much miles a model can drive under such circumstances. So the output of the stats function will be, for example, this. Model 60 can drive 267 miles. This is the lookup table where we get the data from. This is what I talked about already, the state of the application, calculating for the stat function. We use that for calculating the maximum battery range per model. And that Tesla object is also a state object, which contains the currently selected conditions of the user. The Tesla stats component, let's pass properties data to the child components. How do we do that? We use their vbind or a column to pass properties from the Tesla battery to the Tesla stats. Here you see the stats component. Here I show you the Tesla battery component, and you see here that the name is Tesla battery in the default section, and you see also in the template that we call here our Tesla stats component, and in stats component we pass the stats properties. We pass the stats properties, and the stats properties is an array. I show you here on the right side. This is what we pass to the stats component. And how does the stats component receive the data, receive the properties? Here in the export default section, in the properties section, we define the property stats of type array. And then when we receive the stats, we can render the stats in the template and make use of the v4 directive to loop through these stats, and a key to manage the order of the list, or order of the stats I want to show. So Vue make use of directives. Here you see the v4 directive, and you see also that I loop through these stats, and in the middle you see that the stat model is rendered, and then I make use of a pipe lowercase. That is a custom filter. You can define your own custom filters also in Vue in the filters section. So when I go back to the application, you see here underneath also the filter section with the lowercase. So components are like JavaScript functions. They receive data as input and return a view. React, you shall see that React works a bit the same as Vue. React is not really a framework, they say, but it is a library for building user interfaces. We are going to make the same dashboard, of course, but the syntax of a component is a little bit different. And we define a class for a component, and we give it a name with a capital letter, always, and it extends from react.component. This component has a render function to render a view. And in HTML you can call this component a welcome component like that, like this. Here we see an other example where we, in the render function, we return a HTML text div, hello, and then you see that I define within curly brackets that this property name, this property.name, that is JavaScript. So you see that I return there HTML and JavaScript together. They call that JSX. So you can, what I do here is I render here a hello text with a property, and the property I can pass in the HTML. So for example, in HTML, I do welcome name is Sarah, so I can pick that name up in my JSX and it will render hello Sarah. So components are like JavaScript functions. Again, there are two types of state in the React applications. Via this props we have state, and via this state. It's the local state within components. I'm going to talk about it. Here you see a simple example about how to make a React application. At the bottom you see a div element with an ID root, and then there above you see React DOM.render. We refer to the root ID, and we attach a app component to it. We define that app component here upstairs. The app component extends the React component, and it has also a render function that returns the welcome components, which I already explained you, and it will render hello Sarah, hello Alice, hello Maria. Some statement about this props never changes props in your simple components. This is only the responsibility of the parent component. So only the Tesla battery component may change the properties, and the child components should not change it. And the UI looks the same in the React application. You see that the application has the same structure as in Vue, only that the components has a .js extension. Here you see the components tree. Here you see that the application is initiated by index.js. The index.js calls the app.js, and the app.js has two child components in this example, a header and a Tesla battery. I show you a little example how the App.js works and how it imports the header in React. Here you see an App.js component. It imports a header from component's header. The class app extends from a React component, and it has a render function that returns the header. That's simple. And the header looks like this. The header component is a little bit different. I use here a functional component that is nothing more than a function. I define here a function with an arrow function. With an arrow function, I define here a function, an header function or a header component, because this works faster in React than normal components. When you have a dump component like a header, then it is better to make use of these types of components. We import here React, we import the header styling, header CSS, we import a logo, and what do we do here? We define here a header function, header functional component, and we render here via the image tag a logo, and underneath we export the header so we can import it in the App.js. It's a little bit similar like public in Java, the export function. So the components tree looks like this. We have the Tesla battery, and Tesla battery does the heavy lifting. It provides the state of the application. And here you see a little example about the Tesla battery, which is in our real application much bigger than this one. But I show you only the basics, that Tesla battery extends the React component. It has a constructor. It calls it super. Why does it call this super? Because then this is, then we can use this dot state. The this we can use then, and the this is then initialized. The state of this application contains the car stats, of course, statistics, and the config object contains the user data, which is filled in. In the render function, we make use of destructuring to get the config data out of the state, and we can use that later in the examples. Here's a very simple example where we return the Tesla car only, where we return or render only the Tesla car. The state of the application, the car stats contains the maximum battery range, you know that already, and the config contains the currently selected conditions of currently selections, user selections. The car stats can return this, can have this output. This is the model data, the lookup table we were working with. How do we pass data from the Tesla battery to the Tesla car component? This passing properties to the Tesla car component. How do we do that? From the Tesla battery, for example, we want to pass the wheel size to the Tesla car. You see that in the yellow part here underneath, you see that the Tesla car, you can pass the wheel size via the wheel size, the wheel size property. You can define that yourself. How do you receive properties in the Tesla car components? We also use here the arrow functions to make use of these, and we can also render these properties then. Changing the state. Do not change state with this state is new state. Always use in React this.setState. Class welcomes stateful. Here you see an example of a stateful object, and I want to show you how you can play with the set state to change the state. In the constructor, we defined a state variable message, my friend, and we have a render function which will return a text hello, my friend, because this state.message contains the message my friend. How can we change this message? First, I define here a method update message in the middle. And in this message, in this function, I define and make use of the this.setState to change the state of the message. To change the message. I change the message from my friend to my friend from change state. And how do we trigger that? We trigger that via a button. Here you see in the render function, I return here a hello this state message. And I can change that message with the button on click event. And I call here the this update message function, which I already defined here. And I make use of the set state. Make use of the set state because then then React can render the changes for you. Here in the constructor you see something different. This update message is this update message binds this. That means that we can use the this also then in our method. How do we recalculate the statistics when the wheel size changes? When we want to recalculate the statistics, we have to define a known callback function in our Tesla battery component. It changed the same way as I showed you already with the welcome stateful component. You see that I also use the thisSetState function to change the state of the config of the wheel size and change the stats. And how do we trigger these handle change wheels? We trigger that also in our render function, of course. And I pass this callback function, pass it to the Tesla wheels component, and you can imagine that you can handle that and trigger that callback function also in this component. A comparison, yeah. We want to talk about a little bit comparison in React and Vue. Facebook is backed up by Facebook, so it is guaranteed that it will be in live. And Vue has also a big community, but it's not backed by a big player like Facebook or Google. When you want to make mobile apps, it is not a problem to make that in React Native, and Vue you can also make use of Vue Native and NativeScript. React uses plain JavaScript. Yeah, that's also good. React is less opinionated, you can say, like less opinionated, and Vue is makes use of different solutions like directives and routings. React is 100 kilobytes big and Vue 60 kilobytes, so performance-like they are the same. Vue is easier to little more easier to learn, they say. React you have to code a lot because the Tesla battery component costs you 200 lines of code to write when you look into the workshop. And in Vue, it costs you 100 lines of code instead of 200. For React, there are more developers available, and in Vue, you have nowadays less developers. Both frameworks use the virtual DOM, so it's quite fast. They have the same performance, and they are component-based. These are the interesting links about my workshop and about my articles I've written. Thank you very much. Do you have questions? Thank you.